and welcome to Talks at Google. My name is Cassie Koserkov, and I will be your moderator today. And I am so excited to introduce our special guest, Jon Levy. Jon is a behavioral scientist extraordinaire. He is an amazing creator of communities, and he's a two-time book author, and we are here to celebrate his second book, You're Invited. So I'm so excited to welcome Jon. Hi, Jon. It is so good to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. You know, I'm a huge fan of yours, and I'm
just
beyond ecstatic that I get to be interviewed by you. So thank you.
It is completely mutual. And Jon, you and I were both behavioral scientists, and a lot of people don't know what precisely that means. So, and I love how much of an evangelist you are for what we do. So can you tell us a little bit about our species?
So for sure. And I think I have a really fun way of kind of describing this to people. And to do this, you're going to need your phone. So everybody who's watching, here's my Pixel. Grab your phone, and I need you to put it face down on your table, wherever you are. And here's an important question for you. You look at your phone probably like 50 plus times a day. Without looking, what is the app on the top right corner of your phone? I want you to guess. Okay, now I want you to quickly look if you were right. I'll wait, don't worry. And now put it face back down. And you'll notice that probably about half of you were right and half of you were wrong. But here's the real question. Without looking, what time did the phone display? And chances are there is no way you could keep track of that.
Yep, I got it wrong on both counts. Mine was Google Maps, and that was not what I expected to see there. Even though I use that app a lot, and yeah, and also I should kind of know what time it is since I'm moderating. Oh dear. So this is going to be about.
So what's interesting is that the reason we couldn't pay attention to that is actually a characteristic of the brain, or a bias known as inattentional blindness. And the fact is that the brain mostly only notices the things that we tell it to look for. Everything else is kind of ignored. And
so that means, so that means we're constructing our realities with what we see, right?
Yeah. So we, as behavioral scientists, our job is to kind of figure out all the things that we're missing and kind of burst the illusion of what's actually going on in reality, so that maybe we could, with what's in our blind spots, become more effective, connect better, become more successful. And that's kind of where our research tends to focus.
And behavioral science is a huge thing. Your area is the science of influence, right? But that, I'm getting the sense, is not the end for you. That is a means to an end. So what are you passionate about? What is the mastering the science of influence towards? And that's also in the book for those who are going to read it. So please tell us a bit about that.
So the area that I'm most concerned with is around how we connect and how we really develop belonging. So if we really look at what influence is, it's an ability to affect a person or an outcome. And for the things that we care actually about having influence, it tends not to be about like, okay, if I have 1 million followers on Instagram, that's great, but that won't necessarily get me a promotion at work. It won't necessarily help me get my kid into the school I want them to go to, or it won't help me get into the fitness program that'll, get me to the level of fitness that I want. And the kind of influence most of us really care about have to do with who we're connected to, how much they trust us, and the sense of belonging that we share. And that seems to be really important to live the lives that we want.
So that is incredibly important. And so what you're about is not hoarding influence, but turning it into human connection, which is so important and more important today than ever. Though, something that we behavioral scientists have a bit of a bad reputation for sometimes, maybe with folks who are incompetent evangelists of what we do. It gives the sense that what we do is sort of creep-tastic, that we manipulate people by, seeing things like we understand that they have inattentional blindness, that they don't see everything. that their eye takes in there, and you see what they pay attention to. So maybe we can manipulate what they pay attention to get them to do something, right? It sounds pretty creepy. But what I really love in your book is that you talk about a guiding principle for doing good behavioral science that is good for the world, and that you'll be able to live with yourself if you do it this way. And I'm a huge fan of this. I see it this way as well. But would you tell us a little bit about this guiding principle?
So you remember in like 5th grade, I don't know, because in the US we kind of do this. I don't know where in all the countries you grew up in, but we have these little strips of paper called litmus tests, and you put them into a chemical and it tells you if it's an acid or a base. And it's like a quick test to know if something is safe or not. And the test that I have is, with all the research that we have and the way that we understand how human beings behave, when I have people interact with like an activity or a site or something, I tell them all of the science it's based on. And that way I look at and judge their response. Because if it's done in a benevolent way, if I'm doing it for your best interests, for example, if you come to one of my events and I tell you, oh, we designed this portion of the event so that you bond more because I want you to walk out with friends, and people are okay with it, then you're in the clear. But if you ended up finding out that the real reason it was designed that way was because I wanted you to be hooked on cigarettes, they're not going to be okay with it. And that's when you reach manipulation. And so
yeah, go ahead. I'm just
so fundamentally at the core of it is being benevolent, being honest. So I have a transparency policy. And in general, if you follow that kind of transparency policy, especially if you're willing to tell people who don't know you that well, like your friends will always support you, right? That's why they're your friends. But if you tell people that you don't know that well and they're cool with it, then you're pretty much in the clear.
So I love this, and a little personal anecdote. So reading this book, and I love your book, Jon.
Thank you.
There's always that awkward moment when a friend asks, like, read the book, let me know what you think, and you're like, oh my goodness, am I going to have to quietly say as little as possible. I'm all about the transparency, but I actually legitimately really like this, and so
thank you,
folks. You should get it. You should read it. It's really, really good. Now, what I found pretty fun in reading this, because you and I are friends, is you pretty much lay out the bag of tricks, like the checklist of things that you did a few years ago when we met. And I'm reading this not thinking like, oh my goodness, Jon manipulated me. This is terrible. I respect and appreciate you more. I'm, applauding this. So, folks, this book is it's not just academic behavioral science. What I love is it's super applied. He totally did this stuff on me. It absolutely worked.
So maybe what could be fun is, and tell me if you're up for this. When we first met, I was introduced through a common friend, and I was like, I hear you are so cool. I want to end up having like a close friendship with you. And so there's what I did was really kind of different. And correct me if I'm wrong. I said, why don't you come and do a workout class with me, and then we'll go take a walk together and talk.
Yeah, and so no one had ever invited me for a first meeting like that, and it wasn't just any workout class. So
yeah,
I show up in my gym gear to workout class. That happens to be a boot camp class with pretty much metal music remixes of pop songs. This is great. And a sergeant-looking guy yelling at us maggots to go faster on our treadmill. And I have never had a first meeting like that, but it was amazing. It totally worked, and we're still friends, so clearly it worked. Could you tell us a little bit about what was in those tricks? Why that?
So here's some kind of interesting things. Most in American culture, we tend to have things really, really backwards, right? If what defines our success is who we're connected to, how much they trust us, and the sense of belonging, then most people end up focusing on networking. Now, the problem with networking is that it makes us feel dirty. Research by Francesca Gino at Harvard Business School found that our implicit association is that we need to clean. Now, that doesn't occur when we're making friends. And we forget that we make friends over shared activities, interests, and culture. So I wanted to find an activity that we could participate in. Now, when it comes to building trust, it turns out that like me getting you gifts doesn't really work that well. There's something called, and I know that you're a fan of this, the IKEA effect. And the IKEA effect states that we disproportionately care about our IKEA furniture because we had to assemble it. And so I said, I'm going to invite her for a shared activity, one that's especially novel. So I stand out. So the experience is fundamentally memorable. So it's intriguing, like what's going on here? And then I put in that IKEA effect. We're going to put in shared effort. And as a byproduct of this joint experience, we end up caring more about each other.
It's totally true. It works. And I have, in fact, set up here in front of the last IKEA furniture that I haven't had the heart to throw away because, yeah, I built these things. I built them, and so I kept them, even though I've
4 apartments
upgraded.
Later in 5 countries.
I know, right? I know, yeah. But that wasn't all there was to it. So the shouting at us and the metal, it doesn't sound initially like it's going to be the most conducive friendship environment, and yet, and you mentioned some great research in your book about oxytocin.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about that?
So for sure. So we understood, Dan, that shared effort is kind of what builds culture in society, right? People would go hunting together, gathering. But the question is why? And it turns out that when we invest shared effort into something, if we're doing something that's difficult or that requires more than one person, it inevitably opens up something called a vulnerability loop. You see, in general, we think that trust precedes vulnerability, but it actually goes the other way. When I throw out a vulnerability signal, I say, Cassie, at the end of class, oh my God, that was so hard. I don't know how I kept up with that. If you would have ignored me or made fun of me, that vulnerability would have been punished and trust would reduce. But when you send out that signal and said, John, oh my God, I'm so happy you said that because that was so hard. Suddenly, you've acknowledged it, and we've shown that we can be vulnerable to the same level. We've now suffered and sweated together, and we've gone through this experience, and we were vulnerable with each other, and trust increases. And when we have a shared activity, these loops open and close really quickly. And with each closing of a loop, according to research by Paul J. Zak, it's these pro-social activities release oxytocin, and that chemical that's associated with social bonding causes us to bond more.
Absolutely. And then there's also a role for stress in this.
Oh,
so
yeah.
the stress helps, right?
Oh, for sure. So especially when we're like time locked, it makes us even more vulnerable. When people are yelling at us, or when we're in an environment where it's us versus, then it actually causes us to feel a sense of belonging and community versus an outside effector. And so often when I design an event or an experience, I'll time lock it to accelerate the process at which people bond, because now they don't have hours to meander. No, they've got to get into it. And that means that people have to be really honest. Otherwise, they're going to fail.
Yeah, I love this. The vulnerability loop totally works. And you've definitely got to keep it going. And for the engineers listening, it is the 3-way handshake of friendship. So you do have to make sure that when you send out that signal, that you acknowledge and signal back, and then keep that going on both ends. So that's really, really nicely put in the book. I also I totally agree about what you said earlier about how networking can make you feel a little dirty.
Yeah.
And usually I say a flat no to things that look like networking requests. And there is only one reason that I said yes to that meeting in the first place. And that is because we were introduced by a mutual friend that we both love and respect. And you go into great detail on what that's all about in the book as well.
Yeah, so there's this characteristic called the halo effect. It's kind of like a transitive property if you're a math geek. But the way it works is that because I trust Alexa Mead, who's this super awesome artist. If you're
She's
watching,
wonderful.
you should check out her work, buy her NFTs. I don't know. Then I trust her, and she said I should trust you. Then the transitive property exists. That halo spreads. Now, what's interesting is that we actually don't use that effect nearly as often as we could, because if there's virtually nobody we couldn't reach if we just keep asking for an introduction after introduction. And I consider myself really lucky that Alexa, I don't even know how she decided, but thought that we'd hit it off, and we totally did. So it's super cool.
So what advice would you have for what I think you call the friendship hoarders? And what are they? And if anyone in the audience is listening, and if you recognize yourselves, maybe this would be some good tips.
It's kind of interesting. There are two factors that I think are really important. If you get that our influence is defined by who we're connected to, how much they trust us, and the sense of belonging that we share, then you can begin to realize that if, let's say, I'm friends with 5 people and they don't know each other, then they're kind of kept at a distance. But if I begin to introduce these incredible people to each other, it actually brings them closer to me. So the more friends, Cassie, that me and you share, the more likely we are to have a positive impact on each other. And there was this wonderful research by Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler. They were curious about the obesity epidemic. And what they found was that if I have a friend who's obese, my chances increase by 45%. But more interestingly, my friends who don't know them have a 20% increased chance. And their friends have a 5% increased chance. Everything from happiness to marriage and divorce rates, smoking habits, voting habits, all passes through our networks. And the tighter our networks are, the closer people will be to us, and the more positive impact we can have on each other. And so if you're hoarding relationships thinking, oh my God, I don't want to bother them or any of that, you're actually missing out on an opportunity, because you personally can only stay in touch with so many people in a week. But if they're friends with all of your friends, then they'll get updates about you, and they'll be curious about you, and they'll care more about you.
And I think you mentioned also a great point that's attached to this, which is the mere exposure effect.
Oh, yeah. And the story behind that is that I share there is so crazy, right? Do you mind if I share it? Just because.
Go ahead. Yeah, please.
All right. So in 1911, a guy walks into the Louvre, walks into the Renaissance section. It's a Monday, it's closed, nobody even notices he's there. Finds the smallest painting he can and rips it off the wall, throws it under his workman's smock, and then ends up just walking out. Nobody notices. 24 hours later, the world discovers that the painting is missing. The story goes viral. There's a reward. Everybody's searching for it, and nobody can find it. And what ends up happening is that it takes another 3 years for the painting to reemerge. And in that time, thousands of people stood in line just to see the empty spot. Now, when it was finally returned, the world rejoiced and the story went viral again. And it was put into the Louvre in a coveted place. And that's the only reason any of us know the Mona Lisa. Up until that point, nobody cared about that painting. But simply being exposed to something more frequently causes us to like it, causes us to trust it more generally. And it developed such a reputation that now I think it's 8 million people a year go to the Louvre just to see the Mona Lisa. That's crazy.
Yeah, it is so crazy. And you know what? Before I read that in your book, I actually had no idea. So I guess my art history education needs a little help. But yeah, that was one of my favorite stories there. It's
really funny because my research partner, Dr. Moran Cerf, and I did what's probably the largest study in history on dating. And we asked the question, what actually causes people to date? And overall, anything that was familiar, right? If you went to the same type of school, you're more likely to date, same religion. Opposites do not attract at all. But the funniest thing we found was that if you have the same initials, you're 11.3% more likely to date. Now that's ridiculous, but that's an extreme version of the mere exposure effect. called implicit egotism, which is that things that remind us of ourselves because we are most familiar to ourselves are more appealing. And so it seems that all of us just want to date a slightly different version of us.
Too many mirrors in the house, right? too many selfies. Now, I want to ask you, so this advice, it's all towards building communities, and it's particularly urgent right now. That, now of course, in the pandemic, we've all had quite the rough year for our social ties. But in the book, you've written about how even before the pandemic, things were getting bleaker and bleaker in our society. You call it a loneliness epidemic. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
So, well, thank you. And I'm appreciating that I can actually talk about this because I'll be honest, I grew up really geeky. I grew up geeky in a time when it wasn't cool yet. Like now you could be a famous, product designer or create amazing technologies that millions of people use. Back when I was growing up, I was obsessed with comic books and computers, and I was frankly pretty lonely. And I thought that made me different, and because I always saw like the cool kids hanging out. And it turns out that in 1985, researchers looked and found that the average American had just about 3 close friends besides family. By 2004, we were down to just about 2. So in 19 years, in less than a generation, Americans lost 1/3 of their close friends besides family. That's startling and really concerning, because when I looked at the research on human longevity, on what causes us to live a long time, as much as I'd like to think that it's these crazy workouts that I make Cassie do, or that kale cleanse that I did last year or whatever it was, the number 2 characteristic is actually close social ties. And the number 1 after genetics is social integration, that we feel like we're a part of a community. Fundamentally, belonging, feeling like we are a part of something, is the greatest predictor of us living a long time.
So this is super important stuff, because this is about living better and living longer. And I love that. So your book it's interesting, but what I love even more is that it's inspiring. I mean, reading it, I felt like I needed to go and aggressively friend make, which I've actually been doing since I read it. I had the copy before it came out this week, so I was super lucky. Thank you, Jon. And I was super motivated to do that in a way that I wasn't before I read it. And I met a whole bunch of wonderful people, and I feel like I'm happier in my life. So that's the single best thing in the past month, 6 months, I don't know, that's contributed to my happiness. So that's awesome. Incredible. Yeah.
I think it's important to note that when I share this research, people love to go and blame technology, right? And I'm sure that there's negative impacts and all that, and there's also positive impacts. But if we look at what's actually eroding our social ties, the number one culprit might be that we're just moving a lot more for work. And every time we move, we reset our social circles. And so we became a more transient culture fundamentally.
Yes, my intuition totally lines up with that. And something that is really incredible about the book is that it's not just saying there's this problem, there's this epidemic, we're transient, we're helpless, there's nothing we can do about it. You're giving concrete steps, concrete advice for building those communities, making friends, improving your life. But now I imagine some of the listeners are thinking, well, okay, so things are going to be described in here, like inviting people to dinner or, talking to strangers, that kind of stuff. But I feel like, I'm nervous and I'm going to mess up immediately. And should I even be talking to these very busy people? What would you say to those folks?
So I'd say a few things. I kind of developed a reputation around human connection because my research led me to create something called the Influencers Dinner. I spent much of my adult life convincing people to come to my home, 12 at a time, to cook dinner together. But they're not allowed to talk about what they do or give their last name. And when we sit down to eat, we play a game to guess what everybody does. And that's when they find out that it's a Nobel laureate, an Olympic medalist, cooking with a celebrity and an editor-in-chief. And hopefully Cassie will finally come and make me a terrible meal along with these other people who don't know how to cook.
Oh, I have all the terrible cooking skills. I keep using cooking metaphors in my talks, and people think that's because I can cook. Oh, no. So yeah, be afraid.
So, and I've hosted over, I've hosted 227 dinners in 10 cities in 3 countries, and probably built the largest community of kind of thought leaders, I'd say possibly in the world. And one of the things that I find pretty amazing, first of all, you'll see a lot of the principles we already talked about. We have a shared activity. It's really novel. You have that IKEA effect. People are cooking together. And overwhelmingly, people are thankful for the opportunity. And I think the reason is there's a whole slew of reasons, right? First of all, if you're nervous to connect with people, I think we're all nervous right now. Like, let's be honest. My social skills are not the best right now. When I have occasionally seen people in public, I'm like scared to shake hands. Do I give them an elbow? Like, what? I don't know what to do. I feel like my muscles.
He says that. He's a social role model. Yeah.
I'll tell you straight up. It's a little awkward. I don't know if I can hug people. And so I think the first thing is that we kind of just need to lean into those feelings. And it's completely okay to tell the person that I'm meeting up with, hey, you're the first person I'm seeing in a year and a half. I'm going to be a little awkward right now, but I'm super excited to hang out with you. So thanks for coming out. And I think that puts people at ease. Cassie, earlier we talked about the pratfall effect. And, yeah. And I'll give like the 2-second explanation, but you have the best experience around this. And I'm hoping you're willing to share it. And
yeah, absolutely. You want to describe it first, and then
sure.
I will. Yeah.
So if any of you have ever watched a rom-com, romantic comedy, you'll notice that like the male or female lead is always falling all over themselves. Like they're kind of goofy in that way. But you'll also notice that we actually like them more because of it. And the pratfall effect is that if people kind of mess up a little around us, we tend to like them more. It's kind of like a vulnerability loop. Once they show us that they're human, we feel safe. And researchers looked at people going into interviews and found that if they spilled a bit of coffee on themselves or it was dropped some papers, they got rated higher in the interview than if they were perfect. And Cassie and I were talking about this, and you shared this ridiculous scenario that happened to you.
Yeah, so I'm a total clumso, and people keep asking me, oh, what's the story of getting the job at Google? The first part was I was minding my own business, dressed as a punch card, as one does, in my stats department, and there's a Googler visiting the department, and I was first looking like a total weirdo. I attended his talk looking like a total weirdo. And then in the middle of this talk, I opened this bottle of Diet Coke and managed to have this amazing radius of spray in every direction and all over myself. And I felt totally goofy and embarrassed by this.
Super embarrassing.
But I think it probably did put people weirdly at ease. At least there was some joint thing to laugh about. And I'd totally forgotten that had happened before we started talking about this. And, that's not the only job interview that I have spilled things all over myself. So, people ask me what the secret of my career success is. Maybe it's just, wearing all kinds of food and liquid stuffs on myself. Who knows? Yeah.
You heard it here first. If you want to get hired at Google, spill something on yourself.
That's right. So another thing that I want to ask you about is, of course, everyone wants to know this, virtual events. And you talk about the awful mistake of trying to create a virtual experience during the pandemic with just a lift and shift of the physical one, and how that didn't work out. And before you tell us more about that, also as an inside view into how Jon operates. So Jon has some online events that I've been very privileged to participate in. These are literally the only online events that I have willingly come back to, because things are the lift and shift from physical to virtual is usually pretty awful. But there's a wonderful formula that you use that applies some of these tools. And I'm sure people are really, really keen to know how they can borrow some of that so that they can.
For sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk about just the basics. When COVID hit, suddenly we found ourselves on like these string of invitations to go on Zoom and see a poor quality fundraising concert as we, were on the tail end of an 800-person WebEx or something. It felt completely sterile. And so while we heard some choppy music, we would then wash our dishes or answer emails. And let's be honest, if we wanted to be entertained, I would go onto YouTube and search funny videos, right? Or I'm going to go onto Netflix and watch what was back then popular, Tiger King, right? So there's this assumption that people go to events to be entertained and to be enlightened. But that's not it. As human beings, there's several other characteristics that actually really appeal to us that are, I'd say, frankly, often ingrained into in-person events that we don't have in digital events. And that's, I could stay at home and listen to Spotify, but it just feels different being at a concert. And that's because there's an energy to the crowd, there's a potential to connect with them. The other aspect is that we have an ability to have an influence over our experience when we're in person. So if I scream and shout and clap, right, the people around me are fundamentally affected by it. So it's not just enough to be entertained and enlightened. We also need a sense of influence and a potential of connection. And so when we shift to digital events, it's not enough to be done to, we need to feel like we can do. And so at the base level, that's things like polling. But at the events that Cassie was talking about, we welcome everybody. And then we immediately put people into breakout rooms with small groups. And we either give them games to play, so there's that IKEA effect and that team feeling of being together against other teams competing for something, or they get to have cues in order to have conversations on everything from like, what do you want to be when you grow up, to what's the lesson you would tell 18-year-old you? And so as a byproduct, they get a sense of connection and influence. Then we bring people back, and during the talks, we try to make it as interactive as possible. So one of the reasons we played the game with all of you about inattentional blindness was we wanted to give you a way to interact. But during our events, that might mean that we give, as people talk, we do polls or we play a game together. Probably the most ridiculous one was we created a game called Greek or hip hop. And it was quotes from hip hop music and Greek mythology or wisdom. And people had to guess which one it was over the polling features. But as we asked it, we had Nia Vardalos from My Big Fat Greek Wedding compete against Roy Wood Jr. from The Daily Show for points. So we were all playing along with them. And so it was really interactive. You can see that we were connecting, we had a sense of influence, and it both entertained and enlightened. So you can see it's just a fundamentally different experience than being at the back end of some webinar.
And super effective and really powerful tips. And folks, I think that the world is, of course, going to start opening up and coming back to normal. But I think that the online and virtual communities are going to be a really important part of our lives. I think that's going to be here to stay. So great tips in the book for that as well. But Jon, do you think the pandemic has fundamentally changed the nature of communities, or is this perennial? Is this?
So I think that there's 2 or 3 things that we can look at. The first is, people who have lots of friends tend to make a lot more friends. people who are isolated, who maybe went into the pandemic feeling lonely already, we tend in those situations to feel like we're deserving of being lonely, and we tend to isolate even more. So I think that there's going to be a lot of people who go back to life and who go to social events. And then there's a bunch that we really need to watch out for and support and get them to come back out and feel less lonely and less isolated. Because I don't want to create, or I don't want to be part of creating a greater divide in our culture between. Now, I do think that online communities can offer huge support. There are these beautiful stories on everything from mothers groups to people who are LGBTQIA to everything out there. You can fundamentally find people who hold your view and connect over the things that you care about. And whereas we used to be limited by geographic distance, that doesn't have to be the case anymore. But one of the things I really encourage is connect over the things that you care about and then see if you can bring it in person. Because just like listening to music at home is nice, it can be really nice to go to a concert sometimes. And being around people feels a bit different. And we can also use some of that time to build our muscles and really connect. And I get some people are introverted, some people are shy. Being shy is different than introversion. Shy is being concerned about being judged. So like you can build the muscle. If you're introverted and prefer hanging out in small groups, go for it. Do what's right for you. But people are really important, and so are relationships.
I love that. And there's advice spanning the gamut in that book, which is great. But I could hug your time for hours, and I think that we should give the audience a chance. So
yeah, let's do this.
Let's look at some audience questions in the queue. All right, so we've got a question from Jason. It says, "Hi Jon, thanks for writing this book. It was never taught to me either at home or at school. Networking is critical to professional success. How can we make sure that networking is taught en masse?"
So here's what I think we want to do is, there's nothing inherently wrong with the word networking, but the emotional connection that people have with it is something that scares people, right? Like it literally causes people to cringe. And I agree wholeheartedly, like connecting with people is critical. If we want to have people learn to connect en masse, we need to do a couple of things. The first is teach children to make their own friendships and encourage them. It's a muscle that you build. Nowadays, parents are so helicopterish that we never have to learn and fail and get stronger in the process. There's this theory called being anti-fragile. So if I have a glass and I drop it, it shatters. And it's fragile. But human beings and living systems are anti-fragile. Cassie and I went to work out, and it may have been uncomfortable, but we ended up stronger after. And so we need to remind people that it's okay to be uncomfortable. In fact, being alive is uncomfortable. And to build those skills is an uncomfortable experience, especially when we're younger. The flip side of it is that we should also, I really want to emphasize this, connect with people around activities that you enjoy and care about. Because otherwise you're not going to participate in it anyway, right? For those extroverts, they might be happy anywhere. But for the rest of us, if you're more introverted and you really like hiking, invite 2 friends to go on a hike. Go and you want to make it more novel and more interesting, have each person bring a problem that you want to solve and turn it into an awesome vulnerability loop. So as you're hiking, you can share, but also you can be quiet because you might just enjoy the nature and the activity itself takes the pressure off. So if we want to do it at mass, I think we need to encourage people to participate in activities and let them get stronger with their social skills.
That is great. Yeah, that wonderful answer. And I love how you emphasize also that networking, don't focus on the word and its connotations, focus on making friends. But what I also like is the way in which you go into something that is a little bit more what we associate with networking, which is once you have started meeting people, to actually engage them and ask them for favors, which feels a little counterintuitive, right? There's this advice with networking, which is, just sort of float around, maybe hoping for mere exposure, but no, don't be the first person.
We don't want to bother people.
Yeah, don't bother anybody. So yeah, talk a bit about what you say about that.
So it's super interesting. I grew up thinking, okay, if I look like I have it all together, then people want to be around me. And that's the exact opposite of the pratfall effect, right? It's the exact opposite of vulnerability loops. It actually makes people feel uncomfortable. And so I took a different route. I eventually had to accept that not accepting people's support was actually preventing them from liking me. So, right, the IKEA effect says, if people invest effort into me, they'll care more about me. So I started actually asking people for their advice and favors and accepting their support. And here's what's really interesting. Research has shown that if I go to Cassie and I ask her for her advice, she actually thinks I'm really smart for doing it because she's an expert. And then if Jon, who she thinks is a smart guy, is coming to her, she's flattered and she'll like me more by giving it to me. The key, though, is don't just go up to like some random superstar and like berate them with questions and asking for favors, right? There's actually a wonderful study done on asking favors where people were stopped on the street and asked for directions. And most of the time they wouldn't give it. But if you first asked for the time and then asked for the directions, then they would give it disproportionately. And the reason is that we first want to get a little bit of effort and then a bit more and then a bit more. You'll notice that with video games. First level, super easy. Second level, a bit more. And suddenly you're hooked. The key, though, is not to just be selfish, right? Like, it's not about taking from people. It's about joint effort. So as they invest effort, you also want to invest effort. Because if that relationship is important and you admire the person and respect them, then it's about having a community and friendship.
Incredible and super useful. And now I have to stop myself from and let the audience, let's have the audience have their go. So what's our next question from the audience? All right, this one is, in the companies you've worked with, what difference have you seen in companies where employees are close with each other outside of work versus those who are together during work?
So I think what you're saying is, what's the difference between companies who actually socialize outside of work versus those that don't? I think that that's a bit of a tough question for me to ask because I'll have anecdotal data, right? I can say that it tends to be more jovial. They tend to be closer. In general, there was research by Paul J. Zak that looked at trust, right? And he found that you could correlate trust to company stock value, employee sick days, and to profitability. In general, that also ties to oxytocin levels and all that other fun stuff we talked about earlier with vulnerability loops. But it makes sense that if I know more about your life and I care more about it, then it's less likely that I'll leave the company and I'll have a longer tenure there, right? The companies where people are being burnt out and don't care about one another probably have much higher turnover. Now, that doesn't mean it's not a great company to work for if you're building a resume or whatever it is that your focus is on, right? I'm not here to judge what's right or wrong for you. But what's important is the question is, what kind of culture do you want? And I do want to add one more important thing. When I talk about being vulnerable, I'm not necessarily saying you need to come in and talk about like your divorce at work or something like that. That might not be appropriate. The kind of vulnerability I'm talking about is appropriate for the scenario. So if I reported to Cassie, it's tempting to want to seem like I have everything put together and I don't need any support. But if I come to her and say, hey, can you give me some advice and insight on the situation? That's me being vulnerable. And since Cassie's the type of person who produces psychological safety around her, I'm going to be more comfortable doing that. And then that would build trust. Now, with a greater level of trust, the longer I'm going to want to work for Cassie. And those kind of leaders are the ones that people hope to work for. So I would say that it's great to know more about people's lives. And if they hang out outside, great. But I think the question is what you want for your life and your career.
So super important to be able to bond at work, to have that trust, to have that safety, whether it happens outside of work hours or inside of work hours, the bonding is good and important for forming that community. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, one more question from the audience. I think we're running close to time, but let's have one more. So this comes from Christine. What are the most common but incorrect stereotypes you've heard on what effective influencing or bonding looks like in the workplace? What about outside the workplace?
Influencing and bonding. I think there's, here's a really good one, but this isn't specific to your question, but I think it'll fit what you're asking. We have this impression, we talk about diversity so much as like this great panacea, like it's going to solve everything and everybody will be happy when we have different people in the room. But what we really need to like accept is that homogenous groups feel great. It feels great. Like Cassie and I see eye to eye on stuff. And so in the behavioral sciences, so it's like a flowing conversation and yes, we're getting so into it. But the problem is because we agree on everything, we don't see any of our flaws. Now, when we have diversity, the benefit of diversity isn't that like Cassie's female, it's that as a woman, she brings a different perspective. And so the more differing perspectives, the more friction there actually is. And diversity is uncomfortable. And that's a really good thing because much like how human beings are anti-fragile, when we apply pressure to us, we get stronger. Ideas are the same way. And without the diversity of thinking and that willingness to be uncomfortable in that conversation, we're not going to find the best solution. And so I think one of the misinterpretations is that like, oh, if we're this lovely rainbow, it's all going to be like easy. No, it's harder, often harder. And that's a good thing. And we should lean into it and be respectful and have psychological safety because otherwise we're not going to hear those voices that are often underserved and underheard.
And what this also means is that this is a wonderful, wonderful growth opportunity for humanity as a whole, because what we want is whatever starts out initially uncomfortable, that eventually becomes comfortable and it builds the community stronger. Don't stop. Seek the next uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And let that build you closer and stronger. And, you know, as we keep doing that and as we keep including everybody, and, you know, we find more and more creative ways to make sure that we understand whom to include and to keep including, that's how we build a stronger world, a stronger community. So it's wonderful, wonderful, magical stuff.
Well said. So
yeah, this conversation has been incredible as always, Jon. Thank you so much for being here. And everybody, I'm serious. I don't usually like promote anything. You all know me, but it's worthwhile. It's inspiring. It's motivating. It's practical. It's on Amazon. So do check it out. Yeah, and thank you so much for being here with us, Jon.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Great fun. All right, thank you. Bye.